Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everybody. Like she said, my name is Harmony Bursey. I am an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. I have been working with the training center for the training center and as a UND employee under the North Dakota ICWA Implementation Partnership Grant for, yes, 6 years. And we just recently got awarded a little bit more money, so hopefully I get to keep doing this work and a little bit longer through UND. So I'm excited and very glad to be here with you today. I'm glad to see so many people have an interest in catching up or refreshing around ICWA law. So I'm glad to have you here. Let's see what else. So we'll get started. So this is the training. One of the things that the 2016 regulations and guidelines hoped to achieve by strengthening ICWA law with those regulations and further guidelines, even from what you had prior to 2016, was to increase consistency in how ICWA is applied within and between states. So one of the things, this training that I'll share with you today is the same training that and I may modify it a little bit. So if I were to train foster parents specifically, or lawyers specifically, or judges, how I would talk to them about it might change a little bit, but I use the same base no matter who gets trained. And that's all very purposeful for the purpose of that consistency and making sure that we're sharing the same message across the board to all people who touch the lives of children and families through the child welfare system here in North Dakota. So this training is usually done when we do it in person. There's going to be some pieces you won't get today. So some of maybe the application pieces, such as, going through and breaking up into breakout groups and looking at active efforts and having that discussion, which I wish we had the time, but there just isn't the time to do that. So you'll get a quick, and I won't say quick and dirty version, because you're going to get all the information. It's just going to be a little bit faster than how you would get it as it's designed to be delivered. So we're going to be fast, but please, like she said, feel free to interrupt, whether it's in the chat or raise your hand. If you have a question, I find it easier to address questions when we're speaking to that topic. So then, we can have some clarity and move forward, because chances are if you have a question, 20 or 30 other people might have that same question. So please don't be afraid to ask. I can't always guarantee I have an answer, but I can guarantee I'll get you one if I don't. So we'll do our best to work together and learn as much as we can today. So, and with that, I will get started. So yeah, like I said, this usually is done in 5 or 6 hours. We're going to do it in 3 with a break. So here we go. And it's a little dry to start. Maybe a little dry all the way through. I don't know, but I'll try to not be as boring as I possibly can be, though I am not very funny. So anyway, so the objectives of today's training, of course, are just, so one of the things that I did when I developed this training, I went to NICWA. NICWA trained me to help train you. And one of the things I did was I looked at the training and found the pieces that are most relevant to child welfare work, specifically agency work. And so the focus of this training is there's 10 pieces to ICWA, but some of those deal with like voluntary adoptions and things like that, which are something that you specifically work with. So we're going to focus today on the application and verification, emergency removal, notice, jurisdiction, preferred placement, and of course, one of the most important pieces is active efforts. And throughout, we'll talk about, engagement practices and how to, work a little bit with Indians. This isn't going to be a lot of information about that, but I do try to incorporate pieces. And of course, if you have specific questions about those things, please ask. And if I can answer that, I will. So one of the questions, if we have any brave souls in this group, if one of the questions that one of the things that I like to start with is does anybody who's here with us today know where ICWA started? Anybody have any ideas? You can throw it in the chat or just say it out loud if you know. Some of you might have been through this training and already know the answer. But anyone?
Oh, there's something in the chat.
Yeah, there you go. Spirit Lake. Yes, you're very right. So there's a lot of controversy in the nation about, and not, I won't say a lot of controversy, that's strong wording, but there's different ideas about where ICWA started. But in my research, and the best that I could do as I looked back into the history of the Indian Child Welfare Act, is really what initiated the beginning of this law. Was 5 grandmas from the Spirit Lake Reservation, Spirit Lake Nation, and their tribal chairman went and addressed the Indian Affairs Commission. I'm going to say, I say that wrong every time, but the National Commission on Indian Affairs in New York, and they worked together with them to approach Congress and to draft the law as it's written. So I would say, we're here in North Dakota, we can be very proud that ICWA started here. And one of the things, with all the work that we've done through this grant, we're really, just I'm going to give you an idea of what the data is saying since we've implemented. Now, when we began this process, the percentage of kids in North Dakota child welfare under state jurisdiction, this isn't including tribal cases, was 37%. Today we're down to 30. So we're down 7%, which is the opposite direction that many, if not all, almost all. I couldn't find one, but that doesn't, I'm not a statistician. I couldn't find a state that had gone down in ICWA cases. So I think we can be proud of all the work that we've done together to strengthen the application of the Indian Child Welfare Act. And that's why you're all here today. So let's get started. But yeah, I always think this is kind of an iconic picture. Early in the grant, in the 40th year after ICWA had been initiated, enacted, the Native American Training Institute actually honored the relatives of these women and this chairman at the NATI conference that was held in Spirit Lake. So that was really nice to be a part of and to be there while those people, they have all since passed, but we honored their family with star quilts and things like that. So it was really special to be a part of that, and very honored to be from North Dakota when it comes to ICWA. So let's get started. So the definition of an Indian child, this is, as it is stated in ICWA law, any child who is unmarried and under 18, and they are either a member or a citizen of an Indian tribe, or they are eligible for member and have a parent that is an enrolled member of an Indian tribe. So that's the legal definition. So that is how we apply, because one of the things, ICWA has often been recently accused of being a race-based law, but really what it is it's a law that's based on a political relationship that the United States government has with the federally recognized tribes that exist within its boundaries. And so in order for ICWA to apply, there may be families that you encounter who are Native or Indian as they consider themselves, but they may have children who don't meet the requirements to be enrolled, and thus the Indian Child Welfare Act would not apply to those children, even if parents are enrolled members. So it is definitely based on a political relationship between the United States government and federally recognized tribes, and not based on race or just the notion of being Indian. So what do we do? Anytime that there's reason to know. So this is where it's important. A lot of times you get questions about, in the beginning, when you first meet a family, you haven't had a chance to determine or verify their tribal enrollment. So what ICWA law states is that, you need to determine, whether or not there's reason to know. If there is reason to know, and on the screen, you'll see some different ways that you can determine if there's reason to know. And of course, this isn't an exhaustive list, but if you get a hint, or that a child is enrolled, then it is really best to ask. And what you would do for the law is you would start applying the Indian Child Welfare Act's tenets until you in fact know that the children or the family in question is not eligible for the application of the Indian Child Welfare Act. you know, so of course, if they're a child of the court, if they're domiciled, which we'll talk about a little bit more in depth. A lot of these things we'll talk about in more in depth as we move along today, but this is intended to also to guide me through the presentation, but also to be a resource for you to refer to later on as you do your work. So so by a show of hands or in the chat, if you encountered this particular child when you went to go and do an assessment, a CPS assessment with a family, would your automatic assumption be that this is a Native child? Would we assume? Shake your heads. I can't see very many people, so I'm sorry about that. You know, traditionally, this is a fair skinned. Her eyes are even kind of that hazily honey, you know, honey colored. She's got blonde hair. If you saw this child, if I saw this child, I wouldn't automatically make an assumption that this child is a Native American child, right? And traditionally, most people wouldn't, you know. So, but this is my granddaughter. So if anybody were to ever, and my daughter, who is also blonde, you know, if anybody were to ever encounter them in CPS, I would hope that they would ask and not, you know, just by looking at this child say, oh, I'm not going to ask. The chances of them being, you know, this child being Native are slim next to none. You know, and I don't know if how many of you know Pete Tunseth, who was the old director of the CFSTC training. I'm really going to, Amy, I got to get a picture of his grandkids and some authorization.
Yeah, we should get on top of that because it's the perfect comparison here.
It is. It really is. So Pete Tunseth, and those of you who don't know him, he is very light skin. He's actually a red hair. You know, so that kind of light, you know, usually people with red hair have super light skin. His grandkids look like they're way more Native than mine, if you were to just see them, but they are not, in fact, you know. So let's not let our assumptions about the outward appearance of any child or family, you know, guide whether or not we ask. It's just always, you should always ask in North Dakota and anywhere across the nation, whether or not there's some Native American heritage. And then if so, you would begin to think about doing, you know, active efforts and those types of things. So when does ICWA apply? So legally, ICWA applies to child custody proceedings. So those, of course, are your foster care placements, pre-adoptive placements, adoptive placements, any termination of parental rights and emergency proceedings. And then, of course, throughout the casework that you do with the family in between. It also does, you know, just if there's anybody here from Catholic Charities or anybody who works just in the adoption realm, there's also some ICWA requirements around voluntary placements or voluntary terminations of parental rights that must be followed as well. But I won't get into that for this particular group. But if you have questions about that, you're sure welcome to reach out and ask. So here are some situations where ICWA does not apply. I often, especially early in the game, I got a lot of questions, mostly from out of state people, but asking about, you know, custody disputes and divorce proceedings. ICWA does not apply. There is a pieces of ICWA that could apply in a divorce or custody proceeding, and that's only if one or the other parent is seeking the termination of parental rights of the other parent. It also doesn't apply in juvenile delinquency proceedings. So that's, of course, as if, you know, if one of the kiddos, if some child, Native American child, is going to go into juvenile detention because they stole a car or, you know, something like that, ICWA wouldn't apply unless we get a dual status situation, unless there is also a case of deprivation, and then we would work with those families as well. And then, of course, any case that's under tribal jurisdiction would not apply. And this would be more important, you know, especially more important for any of you who work in counties that border reservations. So definitely wanting to ask, you know, if there's any, you know, tribal jurisdiction that's in place for that family before we proceed with any legal action on behalf of the county. So anybody have any ideas of which of these things should not be considered when determining whether or not ICWA applies? We've got A, factors surrounding parent relationship, B, factors surrounding blood quantum, factors surrounding cultural participation, or factors surrounding tribal and social participation. Anybody have any guesses? You throw in the chat which ones might not which of these things should not be considered when determining whether or not to apply ICWA? What do we got? C and D, B, C, D, B. Yes. So yes, yes, the parent-child relationship, whether that be with with each other, but or with their tribes, we wouldn't want to consider that. We don't. One of the things that people often get hung up on is this notion of blood quantum, but it's not really something that you as agency workers really need to consider or think much about. Tribes make the determination, and every tribe is different, right? Whoops, go back a bit. Oh, that doesn't want to work. So. So like I said, I have a very old computer. I don't know if I said this while you guys were all on, but I have a very old computer who does what it wants when it wants. So I guess we'll skip to that. But in referencing the previous slide, whether or not the family has some cultural participation, whether or not they are engaged with their tribe, those types of things have no bearing on whether or not you apply the law. And so sometimes I've had questions in the past, about, like I have a non-native mom, we'll say, who, doesn't want the Indian Child Welfare Act to apply, and they don't have the choice. If their child is an enrolled member of a tribe and has a father who is an enrolled member of a tribe, then the Indian Child Welfare Act applies, regardless of that relationship. It applies regardless of whether or not the native family, maybe both are native, both parents are native, whether or not they're involved with or engaged with their tribe or tribal customs. And one of the things, we didn't address that today, we're not going to really talk a whole lot about the history that led up to the Indian Child Welfare Act, but through years of either extermination and or assimilation practices, a lot of families don't have connections to their tribes or tribal communities or to their culture. And that's a product of assimilation and the extermination that was done by the United States government and, and even the child welfare system, which has gotten better over the years, thank God. So we don't use any of those things to determine whether or not. So before, some courts were applying what they referred to as an existing Indian family, where courts were making a determination as to the Indianness of a family, as in determining based off of that whether or not to apply ICWA, and that's not an allowable thing. So we don't want to it exists and it relies upon that, like I said earlier, the official relationship between the government and the federally recognized tribes and their members, right? So what do we do if there's more than one tribe involved? I don't know if I raise a hand or just raise your eyebrows. How many of you have encountered ICWA cases where there's two tribes that could potentially be a party to the case, right? So of course, if there's just one tribe involved and one tribe noted, then that would be the tribe that you would reach out to for the purposes of ICWA. They would become the ICWA service agent, right? If we have two, if there's an affiliation with two tribes, but the child isn't already an enrolled citizen of one tribe, then that would be the tribe that serves as the ICWA service agent. And it could be the tribe that the primary custodian is not associated with. So mom has a child mom's Turtle Mountain, we'll say, and they have a child who's enrolled in MHA. MHA would still be the service agent, but you surely and definitely could reach out to Turtle Mountain, especially at her request, and they could also, be there to support the case as well. That would kind of be a best practice thing. But for legal purposes of the Indian Child Welfare Act, you have to find one tribe to serve as the official ICWA service agent. And so if there are two tribes and say the child isn't enrolled in either, and there's a question out there like, what do we do? Which tribe gets to be the ICWA service agent? Really what you do is you defer to the tribes and you ask them to make a decision amongst themselves who was going to be the actual ICWA service agent. If there, and this has happened here in North Dakota, if there isn't a way for them to make a decision, if they can't come up with a decision themselves, then it would be in this situation on the state then to make a determination. And there's a rubric or a set of guidelines that we won't get too much into today that would help the court make that determination. So some of those things include, you know, the custodial parents tribe would then be the ICWA service agent, you know, but if the tribes can't decide that, then the state would use a list of things to help make that determination to assign the ICWA service agent to the tribe, or to one tribe or the other. So this is where it becomes really super important to do as much diligent information gathering as early in the case as you can to help out in determining, you know, ICWA application and, you know, and providing the agency, the tribe, with as much information as possible. And that's right down to, so I'll give you an example. My mother's name is Sandra Marie Bursey. My uncle, Carl, married Sandra Marie Azure, thus making her Sandra Marie Bursey. So in my family, there's two with the exact same name, you know, but of course they have different, thank God they have different birth dates, because then we'd really be in trouble if they had the same birthday, but that would be super, super, super rare, I would think. But anyway, you know, so providing as much information, even for grandparents as you can, will help speed up the enrollment verification process, because, you know, the more information that they have, the easier they're going to be able to make that determination for you. So, you know, and I know this can be hard, but even if you send out the ICWA inquiry form and it's very limited information at that time, and as you become aware of more information, refill it out, add that information in, and then resend it to the tribe, because that will help aid that process of determining enrollment, right? You know, so the next thing we'll talk a little bit about, and I'll just pop these out because is just, and some of these numbers are old, but the point of this particular slide is just to share with the field to get a better understanding. One of the things that happened, one of the things that I heard when I began this work years ago, you know, is the tribe just doesn't come. You know, like I email them, I call them, I try to get a hold of them. They don't answer, they don't call back, they don't answer my emails. And then I just don't know. And I don't get verification back for 2 months, and, you know, all of those things. And that's why ICWA partially, you know, if you look at the final rule, which is the 400-page ICWA document, it talks about, you know, tribes' capacity is so stretched and so limited. The resources are limited. So that's why, you know, you give, that's why ICWA applies when there's reason to know, until the tribe verifies it doesn't apply, right? Because they know that there's a capacity issue for tribes in being timely and responding to these cases. So just for example, so across the board, you see MHA has about 17,000 members. And of course, this fluctuates with births and deaths. So it's not a static number. Spirit Lake has approximately 7,500 enrolled, Standing Rock about 15,000, and Turtle Mountain, I just looked the other day, it said 31,000, but I've seen it as big as 36,000, you know, so that's definitely our largest tribe here in North Dakota. In the next line, you see the number of inquiries they get per year. So on average, MHA gets about 200. Spirit Lake, Standing Rock, and Turtle Mountain all get about 1,200 or more. And that's because, so sometimes in other places across the nation, somebody will say that I'm Sioux or I'm Chippewa, but they don't know exactly what tribe they might be from. So then they're sending out inquiries to every tribe that identifies itself as Sioux, and or every tribe that identifies itself as Chippewa. And every time the tribe gets an inquiry, they have to reach out to their enrollment office. And for most tribes, so MHA has one ICWA coordinator or director and one assistant. Spirit Lake has an ICWA coordinator and an assistant. Standing Rock just has an ICWA coordinator, and Turtle Mountain just has an ICWA coordinator. And then on the bottom, you see kind of a roundabout how many cases each of those people handle with the capacity that they have. You know, so this isn't just, you know, getting in your inquiries and, you know, your requests for child and family team meetings and the requests for court hearings. and all of that. It's a lot for one person to handle. And, you know, so one of the things the grant has worked on is trying to increase that capacity for the tribe to be a meaningful part of your cases. And we've made some headway there, but I'll talk about that a little bit later, you know, but this is just to share, you know, and then like I said, behind all of these people, they have to defer to the enrollment office, which is also usually only staffed by one person. And that person is not only looking at ICWA inquiries for verification of enrollment, but they're also enrolling, and they're also dealing with when people die, you know, so it's a lot of work and not a lot of people doing it. So please be patient as you work with tribes, whether that's here in North Dakota or beyond, because all tribes have limited capacity. The Bureau, the federal government only allows enough funding to pay for one ICWA service agent, regardless of tribe size, you know, or need. So just helps to, you know, for you to know that it's not just somebody out there, you know, not paying attention or not wanting to be there. There really is a limitation, you know, on what they can do. You know, so maybe you have verified now, you've gotten an ICWA response form back from the tribe, and you verified that the child that you're serving, the family that you're serving, is an Indian family, and the ICWA law applies, but maybe they're not enrolled. Maybe the children are not enrolled, you know, because enrollment is a little bit difficult for my tribe in particular. You know, we have to pretty much physically go there and submit the birth certificate and all of those things. So for some of the families who live in Fargo and Grand Forks and in places, especially outside of the state, getting their child enrolled is a process, and it's not an easy one. You know, so they may not have be enrolled, or for whatever reason, they may be choosing to not enroll. You know, so people have asked, you know, so if they're not enrolled, do we enroll them? And there's no need to do that, you know. So the responsibility, you know, your responsibility would never be to, on behalf of a child, on behalf of a mother and or a child, would you enroll them, especially if they're not wanting that. There's no need. The Indian Child Welfare Act applies regardless of whether or not they're actually enrolled. If they're enrollable, the law applies all the same as it does as if they're enrolled, you know, but definitely support that process, because like I said, it is difficult. And for lots of families who have limited resources, actually getting their children enrolled is not easy, you know, so supporting that process, if they do want that, would be good practice.
Harmony, there's a question in the chat. Can you explain the difference between citizenship and enrollment? Is it the same thing? Also, I was told that some tribes only do enrollment at specific times. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay, no, thank you. So the process of enrollment is what gets you to be a citizen, right? So, you know, often, I guess I didn't do it today, you know, but I often introduce myself as a dual citizen. I have citizenship in the United States of America, and I'm also a citizen or a member, as I prefer to say it, but it's actually citizenship. I have citizenship in my tribe. You know, so it's a process. Enrollment is the process that you would do to become a citizen, much like a social security number. You know, when a child is born, you have to submit, you know, papers are submitted on behalf of the family to Social Security Administration, you know, and so that's the process of gaining citizenship. So yeah. But people will use a lot of those things interchangeably. They'll be like, I'm a citizen. I don't hardly hear this often. I don't really hear people say I'm a citizen of the MHA Nation. They'll just say I'm an enrolled member of the MHA Nation or Turtle Mountains or whatever it is. You know, so that's kind of the wording we prefer to use, but ICWA does refer to that because it's based on the fact that they do have citizenship. You know, that's more of a legal requirement within, as we talk about the Indian Child Welfare Act, but most tribal members will just say, I'm an enrolled member of a tribe. So, and I'm not aware, there's 576 federally recognized tribes in this nation. So I'm aware of all of their enrollment practices. I've never heard that a tribe only allows enrollment at specific times. I know there's times, I know for Alaska per se, there's times when, you know, you can submit for enrollment, but then they have council meetings or tribal meetings where they review those things and determine, but I'm not aware of any tribe that only allows you to apply at a specific time per se. So, that's the best answer I got for you as far as that goes. So I hope that helps. But of course, one of the caveats to all of this, you know, and this is why this information is really important, you know, in helping to determination their eligibility for enrollment or citizenship or membership in the tribe, is really send as much information as you can, right? And so the caveat to this is if you have terminated the parental rights or are going to be terminating the parental rights and you have a child who has not yet been enrolled, best practice would dictate that you enroll that child after rights have been terminated, you know, or right before rights have been terminated, get that child enrolled, because the enrollment process, once termination happens and an adoption takes place, becomes a lot more difficult. So if you have a TPR, you know you're going to have a TPR and you're looking to adopt, it really is important prior to adoption, after TPR, prior to adoption, that you get in there and get those kids enrolled so that they have that always. So does that make sense? All right. So this is the ICWA inquiry form. I'm hoping each of you has encountered this form as you've done your work, but this is the form that was created through the grants work. We brought a team of in-home workers, CPS workers, foster care workers. The state was there, Heather Trainer was there, the CIP, and of course all the tribes were there, and we worked together, and in 4 hours we developed a form that we felt would meet North Dakota's needs as far as the informal notice of the tribes when there's reason to know that there's an Indian child, or you do know that you have an Indian family who's engaged with your agency. So there's links to this if you haven't seen it. We just had a meeting this morning. We're going to be adjusting some wording to help clarify this process for you, but this form is initiated when there's a CPS referral, like a referral of a report and abuse that goes to and is going to require a full assessment. That would initiate the process of sending this form to the tribe for verification of enrollment. And that begins this process. So is that, does that pretty much sum it up, Amy? I don't want to miss, I want to make sure I'm sharing that. Does that sound right about how? Yeah, so we're just still trying to catch up with some of the new wording for safety framework, and just kind of noticed that our instructions were a bit dated. So we're going to be working on updating those. And of course, we'll share that out with everybody once that's done. But yes, so anytime you encounter, there's reason to know a child is an Indian child, and you can identify a tribe or multiple tribes, you would, fill this form out with as much information as you can, and then send it off to the tribe to begin that verification process. And this is even in non-emergency 960s where an assessment is happening as well. So is that clear?
Harmony, those emails that you had given earlier, are those the people that these forms get sent to?
Yes. So so one of the things is
this is sorry.
Go ahead.
I think at one point we were sending some forms to Marilyn, but her email address had changed or something, and so I just wanted to make sure we have the right contact information to send these out.
Yes, I think so. So if you're ever in doubt, we try to keep it updated on the UND ICWA webpage. If there was, Maryland's has never changed. So if there was an issue, it could have just been like a temporary issue with their internet system or their email system. But hers hasn't changed as far as I know. And so we keep this updated on the CFSTC's ICWA website under the North Dakota Tribal Information. Try to keep on top of that, especially if there's like an ICWA change, a change in the worker, because we know that the United States government has 2 places where they update their service agent information. One of them is done annually and one of them is done quarterly. But another thing you reminded me to share something, this form can also be used for any tribe. you know, this can be North Dakota's form to communicate with other tribes as well, even though, you know, and that's why you can, it's a fillable form, and but you can type in whatever tribe. There's a drop down box, and that's just for ease of use for North Dakota specifically. But you can also just go right in there and type another tribe and their information in there as well, and send that to them in that way. But this form is to only be emailed. That's one of the things. This is just an email form, and this is the informal, you know, initial noticing of the tribe to begin that verification process.
And Harmony, I'm getting a number of questions coming in on the chat privately, just of like, okay, I'm a little confused. I don't know if we've been doing this the right way, type of thing. So long story short, we could say when we move to a full assessment with a family, right, that this form should be initiated. When we move to a full assessment, we know right away in the CPS, right, our tool 3, our assessment form that way, right, in household composition, we designate to ask the family, hey, is there a tribal affiliation, you know, enrolled or enrollable, you know, those sort of pieces. And so once we move into that full assessment, that's when we should be notifying the tribe.
Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah, and that gives the tribe the opportunity, one, to begin, because verification can take time, and hopefully having verification response back, you know, at the end of the 30. So if you have, so, and it's also, you know, if there's reason to know, then that changes the time frame for, you know, when the assessment needs to be completed. But it also gives the tribe that time to make sure that they get the verification back to you in a timely manner. So if there is a 30-day hearing in which, you know, there's going to be a request for removal, you know, then we've got the information that we need as to what laws apply to this proceeding, and hopefully active efforts have begun, but we'll talk about that too. So is that helpful? Does that clarify? Okay.
I think so.
There's a question in the chat that I see. If an enrolled child is adopted by a non-native but relative, does this sever their enrollment? A non-native but relative, does this sever their enrollment? Nothing severs their enrollment. It doesn't. That's why, you know, they're enrolled prior to. There's nothing that will make them not Indian. You know, and there's some benefits to enrolled children, you know, as far as ability to apply for scholarships, you know, and also for that ability to, you know, reach out and to, as they become adults, you know, and hopefully whoever they're adopted by supports them in maintaining ties to their culture, and hopefully family, if there's family available and it's appropriate to do so, but nothing can sever enrollment. So. All right. So any other questions before we move on?
Oh, here's another one. I was just gonna say, good questions. I think they're good for dialogue. So another one came in.
Oh, this is a good one. Yeah, so citizenship has already been verified. Is there still a need to send the form? You would want to notify the tribe, you know, of that full assessment, you know, especially here in North Dakota. We do have a program in which, you know, that and we don't talk about this globally yet because not everybody has access to the ICWA Family Preservation Program, but the counties that do are Ward, Grand Forks, Cass, and Burleigh at this time. As we grow this program, we hope that every Native family in the state gets an IFP. You know, but the only way that they can be assigned, if that's a possibility for them, is that if a form is sent. So you would send anytime there's a full assessment, even if citizenship is already determined, you would send the ICWA inquiry form to alert the tribe that you are working with one of their families. And that gives them the opportunity not only to begin that verification process, but to also provide any support that they might have during the assessment process. So good question. Awesome. Here we go. So now we'll just get into emergency proceedings and kind of what we do when we have some of those situations. And I'll move past that obnoxious slide. So the standards and procedures for emergency removal. So an emergency proceeding means and includes any court action that involves the emergency excuse me, removal or emergency placement of an Indian child. So of course, this is imminent or impending danger. Do you have anything to add here, Amy? Still working on updating present or impending danger. You know, there's a threshold to meet in order. And so one of the things that, you know, North Dakota has done with safety framework practices, really safety framework practices way more in line with the Indian Child Welfare Act than anything we've ever done in North Dakota before. You know, so basically, if you're following the tenets of safety framework, you're honoring ICWA and what it requires for the removal of a child. So that's probably one of the easiest ways that I can share information around that, right? And if anybody else here has anything to add, please feel free, Amy or anybody from the team who's a lot more familiar with safety framework than I am, because I'm not quite got the lingo down yet. So working on that. But so imminent, impending, or present impending danger, you know, some of the things that are the threshold for removal, you know, this is just kind of, I've used to get lots of questions, and I think this is a lot more clear now with safety framework. Like I said, you know, if there's an immediate threat to the child or to the safety of the child, if they're left without care or adequate supervision, or when there's evidence of serious ongoing abuse or neglect, and there is likely a reason to consider or think that there's an fear of an imminent recurrence, that this is really just an unsafe situation, right? And the tools that you have through safety framework definitely help to make that determination in line with what ICWA would expect. So one of the things that ICWA law does require, if there's an emergency removal or placement, and the imminent or present danger no longer exists, the placement should terminate immediately. So this is within the emergency proceeding piece, is that time for removal until the initial hearing or the hearing in which a foster care placement is going to be determined, the need for that. If during any time in that time, if present or imminent impending danger does not exist, the placement is to be terminated, and that can be followed up. You know, maybe there's no present or impending danger right now, but if you still have a family who might benefit from some agency support, you know, you're definitely, you know, we would encourage, you know, ICWA law would encourage, you know, that some support is offered to the family, you know, and this speaks to that part of ICWA that talks about preventing or maintaining a child in their home or returning them quickly, right? You know, so we're wanting to get in there with services even if there's not the need for an out-of-home placement, but still is some issues within the family that could be remedied by the agency's involvement, if that makes sense. I don't want to confuse things there, but you know, so here's kind of the state court. Here's the findings that the state court must have. The removal was needed to prevent the imminent or impending damage to the child. A hearing must be promptly held as to whether or not the kid. So at the 96-hour hearing, you know, if danger is gone, the children can go home at that point, you know, and so that's part of that process of making sure that we're keeping children, getting children back home as soon as they possibly can get home. You know, and if there's no longer that present or impending danger, then they can go home and should go home, and that placement would immediately terminate at that time. So how can it be terminated? One, an emergency proceeding, of course, would be terminated with the initiation of a child custody proceeding, which then the full suite of ICWA would apply. So if you get to that 30-day hearing and you're wanting, and the child needs to continue to be placed outside of the home, then the full suite of ICWA would then, of course, be initiated at that time. Or if the transfer of the child to the jurisdiction of the appropriate Indian tribe, that would end the emergency proceeding. And there's some situations, and we'll talk about that as we get into jurisdiction, you know, where the tribe would have that jurisdiction immediately, and or restoring the child to their parent. And so All of these 3 requirements have to be met if a hearing is going to be continued for more than 30 days. So according to ICWA law, you have 30 days to make this determination, to do your assessment and determine whether or not the out-of-home placement is warranted. And that must be done within 30 days of removal. Unless the court can satisfy all 3 of the requirements on the restraint, restoring them would subject them to more harm. The court has been unable to transfer, or it's not appropriate to transfer the jurisdiction to an Indian tribe, and it, for whatever reason, has not been able to initiate an actual child custody proceeding. And this is, of course, the exception and not the rule, right? So if anyone has reason to know, the agency should if there is reason to know that you're working with an Indian family, the agency should strive at the outset to get the child into a preferred placement, right? And we'll go over those details in a minute. And if they are not in a home that meets the ICWA preferred placement list, then there should be a concurrent plan, even while and the assessment is happening, and efforts made to get the child into a placement that does meet ICWA's requirements, if possible. So, oh yeah, there's that piece. Got ahead of myself a bit. I was going to take this slide out, so one of the things is, and I'll just go past it because it's a little bit obnoxious, but one of the things, that is we noticed as we began some of the work that we've done with the grant is, once an assessment is occurring, it's really important to know that active efforts must start then, that there should be, efforts made on behalf of the agency to remedy the situation, to eliminate the need for an actual foster care placement at a 30-day hearing. And that's why, because if you get to that 30-day hearing, you're going to have a QEW and all of those things, and they're going to want to see that active efforts happened during this time. And some of those things are just as basic even as making sure that there's visitation opportunities within that assessment, especially if there's that out-of-home placement. So seek input and engagement from the tribe pertaining to placement preferences and active efforts during this emergency proceeding, or this period where this assessment is done and a removal has taken place. So there's danger warranting a removal. Is there reason to know? Let's find out the tribal affiliation. Let's determine whether or not jurisdiction lies within the state or within the tribe, and then contact the tribe to start active efforts. This would be case management when you have this emergency removal. So, all right, any questions on emergencies? Where are we at? All right. Okay, so now the piece that we're going to address real quickly is notice. So this section is kind of, this section refers to the actual formal notice that is required by the Indian Child Welfare Act when there is a removal, and has been one. So when is formal notice required? So one of the things is in North Dakota, our court systems manage this notice. And please someone correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that in our state that the court is responsible to send the certified registered notice of hearing, right? To my knowledge, no counties agencies actually do that, but in other states, county agencies are required to do this notice. So I think it's nice that here in North Dakota that this actual formal notice takes place, and the court takes responsibility for this. But anyway, we need to make sure that that's happening as case workers working with the family. If there's going to be any involuntary foster care proceeding or a termination of parental rights, this formal ICWA notice needs to be sent. Notice is sent, of course, to parents and or the Indian custodian if there's one. So this is grandma has, guardianship, or, whoever's, relevant to that case, the child's tribe, and ICWA is a little bit unclear in this piece as far as what we send to the regional BIA office. It does say in ICWA law that a copy of these notices must be sent to the Bureau of Indian Affairs Regional Office. But this is primarily mostly practice-wise done if a tribe, if there's a case where we can't ascertain tribal membership and we need some more support in doing that, that's really when you would make sure that you're noticing the regional BIA office when you need further support. So yeah, I've tried to get the 12 regions in the United States to find some common ground about how and when they want to receive these, but I haven't been able to achieve that meeting at this point. But I know that they don't receive any, you know, some of the regions that I spoke with said that they were receiving full case files and things like that. You would never, it would just be a copy of that notice would go to the Bureau, not any case information. They don't need that at that time. So ICWA recommends, so those are of course required times to notice the tribe, but ICWA recommends that notice happen in all of these situations: any individual per hearing, a change in placement, a change in the permanency plan or concurrent plan of goals, or transfer jurisdiction to another state. But North Dakota does very well in this. They actually go above and beyond ICWA law when it comes to noticing. They send notice to the tribes for every hearing, you know, which is best practice. So we can be proud that our state does that. Notice of all custody proceedings must be sent to all, and this is the piece where they talk about it has to be registered or certified, return receipt requested. That's how it must be sent, so that the court then has proof that the tribe had 10 days. Because there's a requirement that the tribe be notified 10 days prior to any hearing, so that they have an opportunity to prepare and be present. You know, so who sends notice? Like we already talked about this, the court sends a notice. So thankfully our agencies don't have to do that, but the parties seeking foster care placement or termination of parental rights to an Indian child, that is done by our court system. This is what where we talk about when we have difficulty ascertaining the identity or location of parents, Indian custodians, or the tribe is an issue. This is when you would make sure that you're sending all relevant information to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the appropriate bureau, which would be, if you're not sure what tribe it is, it would be our region. You know, and if they've said, well, I'm from a tribe down in, you know, Arizona, you would reach out to the region that covers Arizona to try to ascertain. They would have the best access to helping you determine whether or not there is you have an ICWA applicable family and child. So basically this piece just talks about that notice has to happen 10 days prior to any hearing, and that's the receipt of notice has to be proven 10 days prior to any hearing. And North Dakota does really well. Usually hearings are scheduled in most jurisdictions way ahead of time, you know, so if there's an emergency removal at 96 hours, they set that date and notice can be sent and is sent right away. So North Dakota does a really good job around notice. Once the tribe receives that notice, they have the right to send a request to the court, and they have the right to have an additional 20 days beyond the 30 to additional 20 days from notice to prepare for the case, thus extending that emergency proceeding, you know. So but I'm not too aware that this I'm not personally aware of any time it's happened here in North Dakota where the tribe, you know, requests that additional 20 days, but they do have the right to do so. So So one of the questions that I often get is like, okay, we send all these, notices, but the tribes, especially out-of-state tribes seem to have, it seems to be, somewhat removed and more difficult to engage with out-of-state cases and out-of-state tribes, but it is your responsibility of the state to continue to send notices for all relevant hearings, regardless of tribal response, because it could be that they don't have time or capacity to pay attention to the foster care cases, but when it comes to time for termination, then they would have the right and maybe would have more interest in engaging at that point. So notice needs to continue to be sent. So any questions? Okay. All right, we're going to talk about jurisdiction, I think, and then we'll almost be maybe ready for a break. We'll see. ICWA, the gold standards. Let's talk a little bit about jurisdiction. So sometimes there's some confusion in the states between the words jurisdiction and the words intervention, right? So if a tribe intervenes, and tribes and all North Dakota tribes, I know, intervene on all cases that they get come across their desks. But jurisdiction is a whole different thing. So jurisdiction is when the tribe actually requests to be the court that manages that case, thus removing it from the state's care. That's what jurisdiction is. So jurisdiction, so there's a couple of instances where the tribe has exclusive jurisdiction. So we need to be, making sure that neither of these things apply when we begin working with families, right? So if the Indian child actually resides on the reservation or is domiciled, and we'll talk about domicile, then the tribe would then have exclusive jurisdictions. So situations where, you might have some state involvement, but the child resides and or is domiciled on the reservation can be a couple of things. So say a family goes out of town for the weekend and mom and dad go out and have some drinks, and then they come back to the hotel and they're fighting, and somebody calls the cops, and parents are belligerent, so they're removed. But they're just out of town for the weekend and they're going to go back to the reservation on Monday. The tribe would definitely have exclusive jurisdiction in that case and would transfer that information to that tribe's social service offices. And they would then assume the responsibility for doing an investigation if it's warranted at that point. Domicile can be a different thing. Now, this is also something that isn't often used and isn't often but could be, so an example of domicile would be, so I lived on the reservation and I decided I wanted to go to college. And so I left the reservation with my children and my family, and we moved to Grand Forks. And while we were in Grand Forks, but I have every intention of getting my degree and returning back to the reservation to live. That is the definition of domicile. I've left, whether it's to leave temporarily because there's no housing, leave temporarily, which happens a lot on the reservation a lot of times. So if you live in a town that borders a reservation, you might want to pay attention, to domicile a little bit more, so if they only live in Devil's Lake or in Rolette County or in Rolla, or any of these tribes or towns that border tribal lands, and they're only living there because there's a lack of housing available on the reservation, they would technically be domiciled on the reservation. In that case would then be under the exclusive jurisdiction of the tribe. But also in these cases where a mom is moved off to go to school, or dad has moved his family away to work but has every intention of returning as soon as work is available for him for that family, domicile could be claimed then. And if we can prove domicile and the tribe is so willing to assume jurisdiction, that's the other caveat, then that case would fall underneath the exclusive jurisdiction of the tribe.
So Harmony, would that kind of fall under, I see there's like a question kind of example in the chat where it talks about like given a hotel room for the weekend, can the tribal nation choose not to absorb the case? So kind of answer that, but
so according to ICWA law, exclusive jurisdiction means exclusive jurisdiction. So if domicile can be proved, so in this question here where it says, what if there was a situation where, parents lost it over the weekend at the hotel. And, the tribe, we're trying to get this information out to the tribe because it is determined that these people do live on the reservation and that would be the exclusive jurisdiction. Tribes can do, they really should assume the case, but I can't force a tribe to do anything. But under ICWA law, that's what it would state. But then there's also the piece of ICWA law that transfer of jurisdiction can be stopped if the tribe refuses. So, that would have to happen in kind of, and I'm sorry that that's an answer and a non-answer for you, but, then it would be I don't want to say, then it would be an issue between the state court and tribal court to determine, whether or not somebody's going to take jurisdiction. So a little bit of gray area.
So that would really cover a couple of the questions that came in about if the tribe doesn't want to take the case, if they refuse to kind of manage and take on that report as well.
Yes.
Report for child abuse or neglect. Okay.
Yeah. But, so in those cases, you can refer to ICWA law and say, according to ICWA law, it does state that you do have exclusive jurisdiction. Are you denying? There would have to be some pretty strong wording that there's a denial on behalf of the tribe in those cases to accept the jurisdiction, which they have exclusive, meaning it's yours, so that would be, and I've never even thought of this. I just had the thought of what if the reverse happened? What if there was a non-native family who was on the reservation and had a CPS report and then the tribe said, okay, well, they live in Minot, so we're going to transfer jurisdiction. We're going to send this to Minot because that's where this family lives. And obviously they need some support. Could Minot deny jurisdiction? I don't know. Never thought about that before. So, but yeah. So technically it would be up to the tribe, but ICWA law would support the state in saying you do have exclusive jurisdiction in this situation, and this case should be assumed by your tribe.
And I just had a private chat coming in, just asking, so that should be provided in writing, most likely?
Yes.
Like a lot of question marks.
Yes,
yeah.
As much documentation and yes, would definitely be helpful in supporting that. And, and like I said, tribes never don't want to assume jurisdiction. Assuming jurisdiction is kind of a last straw, especially if there's a case where the tribe doesn't have exclusive jurisdiction. They have such limited capacity and such limited resources. It really, taking on cases that might theoretically seem like they don't belong to me is just a risk for them as far as they see it in their ability to support a family, because they're on ability to support. But like I said, they got the right to do their own, make their own determinations based on the information they have or the capacity they have. But transferring the jurisdiction. So if they're the tribe, the parent, or the Indian custodian can request a proceeding be transferred to tribal court. So this is situations where there is no exclusive tribal jurisdiction. So the tribe, the parent, or the Indian custodian can request that a proceeding be transferred to tribal court. And a request to transfer jurisdiction can happen at any time. It can happen at any time, so even if the tribe isn't requesting jurisdiction while it's in foster care, if there's going to go to a termination, it may be at that point that they would file to assume jurisdiction of the case. And there's some caveats, but we'll get to that in just a second. So say that the tribe requested transfer of jurisdiction. If either parent objects to the transfer, it would not be transferred. This is one place where parents do have some say, So say the tribe is asking for this jurisdiction and mom is like, no, absolutely not. I do not want this case to go under tribal jurisdiction. If the state court has the exclusive jurisdiction, it would stay with the state. In a situation where there's exclusive jurisdiction, that would be a little more grayer and that would have to be determined. Tribal court decides not to assume jurisdiction. So transfer doesn't, so this is where it says, if the tribe says, you know, we have jurisdiction or can have jurisdiction, but we're not going to assume jurisdiction at the time they have the right to do that. And or so the last kind of wild card is good cause to determine, good cause is determined to exist. The state court can deny transfer. So say you had a parent and or a tribe request a transfer to the jurisdiction of the tribe, the state court. If they are the party opposing the transfer and petitioning for good cause, they bear the burden of establishing this in a clear and convincing way. And the use of good cause should be very limited and should be based solely in the best interest of the child. So what good cause isn't in this situation? So the state wouldn't be able to use the advanced state of a case to deny a transfer. You know, even if, like I said, they cannot say, well, you guys had no interest in this case until we went to TPR. We're in the 12th hour now. We're not transferring jurisdiction. That can't be. That's not a sufficient reason for good cause to be established. And like I said, lack of requests for transfer in prior proceedings. You know, the state would not be able to say this transfer jurisdiction is going to affect the placement of the child. That would not be a reason for good cause. They would not be able to talk about the child's existing cultural connections to the tribe and or to the reservation. That could not be used to establish good cause. And they definitely would not want to talk about the socioeconomic conditions or the negative perceptions of the tribal system and use that to determine good cause. So these are all a list of things that cannot be to establish that good cause for transfer. We have good cause in another place, and we're going to get to that. So here's just kind of a decision tree that might be helpful. I like to just share this as part of these slides, just kind of, you know, can follow it, and it helps you to determine where good cause is, or where the jurisdiction of a case should be, right? So it's just a tool for you to use. So any other questions about this piece? No? Nothing? Okay, so I think we have time to do preferred placement, then we'll take a break, and then the last piece we'll go over is active efforts, and that's the longest piece. So so preferred placement, let's talk about that. So does the ICWA identified tribe have an established order of preference? So one of the things you're going to want to, especially if you're dealing with a tribe that you've never dealt with before, one of the things would be to try to reach out to them to determine if they have a different order of placement. Now, I'm not aware personally, but like I said, there's 576 tribes. I'm not aware of all of them, but I'm not personally aware of any tribe that has a different outside of ICWA order of preferred placement. But if they did, you would follow their order of placement as defined by their tribe and not, you know, defer to the Indian Child Welfare Act's order of placement, right? If they don't, then you must follow the preferred placement order that ICWA outlines. So for foster care and pre-adoptive placements, the first placement is family. So anybody have any idea? So I have grandchildren, right? And so if my daughter's children get put into care and non-native grandma wants them and I want them, who gets them? Anybody have any idea? So Brooke says me. Yes, I would. I would, but not because I'm native. I would just because I'm family. So one of the things that the Indian Child Welfare Act, you know, does not specify, family is family, and family is always first order. It doesn't matter who's native. You know, I would get them because I am more involved or I live in the same area that them. So placing them with me wouldn't disrupt where they're going to school and or daycare, would also leave them closer to mom, you know, because other grandma lives in Walhalla or wherever, you know, other grandma lives, you know. So those are the types of determinations when you're determining which family member, if there's multiple family members that are wanting to take responsibility of the child, you would, you know, then just break it down to who is the best caretaker, who's the best for them to be placed with, and it wouldn't rely solely upon me being native. It's because I'm the favorite grandma. So
Who makes those determinations though? Is that up to the county when they're discussing those things, being that family is family, or is that, I mean, the tribe still has the right to step in, so could they?
yes, the tribe still would have a right to have a say. You know, they would definitely, you know, come into the child and family team meeting or wherever this decision is being made and discussed and saying, you know, they have a right to contribute to that conversation, you know, but that would, the court would have to determine placement if there's a, you know, an argument, and use things like, you know, proximity. There's some good cause that we can establish to go against the preferred placement, even if there is family who wants to assume jurisdiction, but hopefully people would just be able to figure that out together. But otherwise the court would have to make a determination if there is not, you know, and then it must be in line, you know, but if it's both family, ICWA preferred placement is happening, and then the rest of it would be up to really making a decision that's in the best interest of the child. And so, and the court can rule on that. Okay, so then the next order of placement is tribe directed. So if there's no family available, then the next thing you would do is say, hey, you know, Marilyn or Shelby or Rebecca or whoever the ICWA service agent is, you know, do you guys, does the tribe have any place that they would like to see these children placed, you know? And if they do, then as long as it's appropriate and there's not good cause that exists to not place them in that place, then that's where you would place them. The next place would be an Indian foster home that the county maybe supports and manages within the area, right? And in order to be, so this is a question I've gotten recently too, how do you become an Indian foster home? What are the requirements? So according to Indian law, and I had to dig deep to find this, but after I looked through a couple of different laws that, you know, so it's like pursuant to this law, so then I had to go to a different law and look at that. So basically ultimately what the definition of an Indian family is at least one of the parents, the foster parents in that home has to be a member of a federally recognized tribe in order to truly qualify as an ICWA preferred placement. If that makes sense. So, and or special needs, an institution approved. So if there's a need to have the child placed in an institution based on their special needs, you would ask the tribe, is there one you prefer over another? Is there a place that you would like to see this child placed? If they don't have anything, then you would then again make a decision based on the best interest of the child. And when appropriate, when appropriate, the court must consider now the preference of the Indian child and or the Indian child, the parents. So, so one of the other things that really is super important to be considered is this notion of the least restrictive setting, right? You know, so you're going to want to place the child, you know, so if a preferred placement isn't available, and even if there is, this is where we're going to get into some innuendo and some caveats for this part of the ICWA law. So you're going to want to place with a family that most approximates their family, taking into consideration sibling attachment. So if you have a preferred placement that says, I'm only going to take 2, or I only can take 2 of the 4 children, but you have another placement that may not fall underneath the guidelines of a preferred placement, who's going to keep the siblings together and take all 4 children, then that would be where you would place them. Because sibling attachment is that constant family contact, right? And keeping that family as cohesive and together as we possibly can. You're also going to want to consider the special needs of a child. If the child has needs that can better be suited and managed and supported, that child can be better supported in a path home or treatment foster care home that has the skills and the tools and the things that they need to provide the better care to that child, then you're going to want to place them there, even if that falls without, and that would be good cause, falls, you know, outside of the preferred placements that exist. And then proximity too, that's very important to consider. You know, you might have grandma in Wisconsin who wants to take the children, but if they go there to Wisconsin, then that makes it hard for mom to visit. It makes it hard to carry out, you know, a reunification plan. And so that can be considered and needs to be considered when making a determination about what's best. for the child. So preferred placements for adoption, real quick, it's a member of the child's extended family, other member of the child's Indian tribes, or other Indian families. Those are the only three that are outlined. And so if adoption is going to occur outside of any of these three, then we're going to have this notion of good cause satisfied. So case management. So this again, an exhausted list of extended family. This is kind of where I talk about, you know, contacting all known members, you know, requesting from the tribes, you know, a family tree that might help aid in that process. And also, you know, as you're talking to family members, is there anybody else? Let's find out who these people are. You know, the diligent search in this part is really so important, and a continued diligent search. So, you know, one of the things that I recommend as far as case management goes is that, you know, you get a list, you get a piece of paper out that says, here's all the family I'm going to contact. And as you contact them, you know, note their reason for, you know, maybe not being able to take the children into their homes, but then at the same time, ask them if they're willing or able to support the family in any way. You know, maybe uncle can't take them because he's got 6 kids of his own, and you know, his life is busy, and he doesn't feel like he could do them, but he lives in town and he can take them on Wednesday nights and Thursday nights when she's in treatment. You know, reach out to them and ask them if there's any way that they, you know, while you're trying to determine placement or any interaction with family, to learn of more family and to see if there's any way that these, so maybe it's grandma on the reservation and she might not be good for placement because that removes, you know, then we've got the proximity issue, you know, but grandma does want to spend time with them. And, you know, so, you know, 1 weekend a month they go and spend time with grandma, you know, and that talks too about, you know, keeping them connected with other family members in the event that things go even further south with the family and we get to a termination space. You know, as long as we've done our best efforts to keep them connected with their family members, you know, and it is a family member that ultimately, you know, comes in at the 11th hour and says, you know, we're gonna, you know, we want to adopt them now that this is going to termination, then you know, it wouldn't be so traumatizing because you've done everything you can to keep the children connected to their extended family in the event that this does happen, and you have some more placement options. And then that, you know, that move for that child isn't as difficult, and for the family that's taking care of them isn't as difficult as it might have been. So, you know, trying to be cognizant of all the possibilities as you work through cases and support families. So keeping them connected to those family members, even if they don't assume placement. Yeah, and then, like I said, just ask everybody, you know, grandma gives you uncle's number, then you ask uncle if there's any family, and then that if you get a hold of that person, then you know, try to get more family members that way and reach out to all of those people. And of course, track this, you know, make sure that you're documenting all the efforts that you are making to get the child into a preferred placement. But what happens is oftentimes you'll get good cause, you know, which we'll talk about in just a second, to place a child outside of ICWA preference. And once they're placed, then there's no more work being done to get them into a higher order placement and or to a preferred placement at all. And that would definitely be a non-active effort. Any non-effort would not be an active effort, you know, so we're going to want to have a concurrent plan in place that supports us having continued efforts to get the child into a preferred placement as early as possible. So departing from placement preference. So here's some guidance around how we do this. So good cause can be established in cases of placement preference. And here are some of the things that can support good cause. A good cause to depart from placement preference would be parental requests. So if one or both of the Indian child's parents attest that they understand the placement options, but they want the child placed with, so say they have a family friend who's going to take their kids, but they're not a native, they're not appointed by the tribe, they're not an Indian home, but that's where parents want. If that's an appropriate request, it can be enough information, enough for good cause to be established, but is not guaranteed. So the kids might, you know, maybe mom doesn't, mom's willing, maybe mom's mom, so grandma's willing to take placement, but she doesn't, but mom's like, I'm mad at my mom and I don't want her to have my kids and I'm not going to deal with this and this, blah, 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 whatever. I want them to go with my friend Stacy, and Stacy is obviously not a good placement for kids. Parents' requests would obviously would not be honored, but it should be considered in a case by case basis. We've had situations too where the child's request. So we've have come across situations where we'll say a tribe in New Mexico wants to take placement of the children, but they're 14 and 17. They're established. They've been a part of that community for years. They're on basketball teams. They have been in placement before, been in placement for 2 years, and they're doing fine. The child can request that and that could be used for determination of good cause to depart from that placement preference and keep the child in their community. And that would be then thus based on the best interest of the child. But a court would determine that as well. Sibling attachment, that can be used for good cause. Like I said earlier, if you've got, grandma wants to take her 2 kids that are, her grandchildren, but the other 2 are not. So she doesn't want to take those kids because she can't take all 4, doesn't have that capacity to do that, or for whatever reason, but you have a home that's willing to take all 4. Sibling attachment can be used as good cause. The child's needs, once again, there's extraordinary physical or emotional or mental needs of the child. You can depart from a preferred placement based on that. The most commonly cited reason for good cause, because anytime that a child is in a placement that is not aligned with the preferred placements, good cause has to be established. And the most commonly cited one is unavailability. That's the last piece. You have to prove that there are truly no other options for placement that align with the preferred placement due to a lack of a Native American child, lack of a suitable family member, lack of a tribally assigned home and or another Indian foster home that the county supports. So not common. Number 5 is what. So departing from placement preferences, the limits on that. So these are 2 things you would not want to say if you're searching for good cause through the courts. It cannot depart, a placement may not depart from preferences based on the socioeconomic status. So you can't say, well, this foster home has more money and they're a safer place than grandma. You would never want to say that. That would not be able to be used for good cause. And or a placement may not depart from preferences based solely on the ordinary bonding or attachment that might occur from a child being placed in a non-preferred placement to begin with. That was made in violation of ICWA, right? So and this is when I talk about make sure you have that concurrent plan and you're working towards getting that child into a preferred placement as soon as possible. And that would help with this part. So this is the hard part, right? This is the part where, they've been in this, with this family for a year and this family's in love with them and they love them. But now we have Auntie who's coming in and wants to take them in placement. This is where having, kids spend time with Auntie, if she's willing to do that, becomes really super beneficial, because then that transition from foster home to Auntie's home isn't so difficult for the children, right? So those are some of the important reasons why we really work hard to involve extended family, because often people might feel different, when they're looking at just the foster care placement versus terminating somebody's rights and having that child adopted outside of the family. Those are 2 very different situations. So I hope that helps. So this is just adjudication standards of evidence. So for ICWA, it's just 1 step above what you might be used to. So for foster care placement, it's clear and convincing. Of course, must be accompanied by the QEW testimony supporting the decision. Termination of parental rights is evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. Also, with the accompanying supportive QEW testimony, there has to be a causal relationship identified on record, stating, why substance abuse is creating an unsafe, why parental substance abuse is making a situation where the parent is unable to safely parent. You can't, so nobody would ever just be able to say mom is actively abusing substances. You would have to be able to show with evidence how that's impacting her ability to be, the parent's ability to be a parent, a safe parent. And without that causal relationship, things such as the following cannot be listed as reasons for removal: poverty, isolation, single parenthood, custodian age, crowded or inadequate housing, substance abuse, or non-conforming social behavior. Those all can be used if you can demonstrate a causal relationship and show how any one of those things is creating an unsafe environment for the child. And so qualified expert witness testimony. Here's just kind of a list of what the QEW is supposed to testify to, whether or not the continued care is going to result in emotional harm. So they have to speak to the safety of the child. They have to and can consider and incorporate prevailing social and cultural standards of the tribe, the child's tribe. The application of foster care and adoption placement standards, and whether or not they're going to, QEW should be looking at whether or not a diligent search was completed, and there were diligent and concurrent efforts to place the child into a preferred placement, and whether or not active efforts were sufficient in attempting to maintain or reunify the family. Whether or not there were active efforts done, and were those efforts effective, right? So, and QEWs can testify really kind of at any proceeding where a determination is made. So if a QEW was assigned, they could testify if they had enough information to do so at the 96-hour hearing, if they were involved and aware, but their testimony is required at any foster care placement or termination of parental rights hearing that occurs, without a doubt. And if you don't have that qualified expert witness testimony that supports the decision that's being, supports the request that's being made, that would be an ICWA violation. So what if we can't secure a QEW, even though we have made several efforts to multiple QEWs? So yeah, if you can't secure a QEW, and this is a problem, and this is a problem that we've been working on, trying to increase the capacity, trying to increase the number of QEWs that are out there. The Native American Training Institute has a QEW training that people can go through. Part of that training is that they have to have tribal authorization prior to being trained. But if any of you know people in the communities in which you live that are Native who might be able to serve as a qualified expert witness in your area, reach out to me and let us know, or reach out to NADI and let them know, because we sure can see if they can be authorized by the tribe. We don't train, NADI does not train anybody who the tribes don't pre-authorize, I'll say, to serve on their behalf. And then all of the people who are on the list are authorized to do so in the state of North Dakota, and that's because they have undergone the training that they need to serve in that capacity. So so yeah, suggestions. I wish I could be more helpful, and we are trying to increase capacity in the states. But if you go on and proceed and a decision is made without a QEW, just know that that case is vulnerable, and that would be a direct ICWA violation, thus making that case more vulnerable to having a decision, whatever decision was made, invalidated, whether that be TPR or foster care placement. So just to think of it that way. A lot of times what they do is continue, but we know you can't continue forever. So but yeah, if you ever run into a super hard case of that happening, please reach out to either myself or to the Native American Training Institute, and we'll see what we can do to support you getting a QEW. So, but I think we are ready, yep, to go to a break. So this is the last piece, and this is the piece that I like to reserve the most time for, and hopefully we'll have some more time at the end for questions. But again, feel free to ask questions as we move along and look at some of this stuff today. So anybody have any ideas what your #1 active effort should be? I'm not probably, I do. So one of the things that I really like to talk about when we begin this process and when we begin talking about active efforts is really the importance of building and maintaining a trusting relationship, right? You know, so Zig Ziglar's words are up on the screen. If people like you, they're going to listen to you, but if they trust you, they're going to work with you. So really one of the first things that should be the focus of your work with any family, but especially Indian families, because there's an additional layer, I think, of distrust of the system, you know, is really working on establishing a trusting and maintaining a trusting relationship. So we're going to talk a little bit about, so for those of you who don't know that I am not a trained social worker, my training is in, I'm ABD for a PhD in clinical psychology. So that's kind of was my frame of work. And when I began this work, I often felt like a bit of an imposter, you know, I'm trying to train social workers and I've never done what you do. You know, but I have learned over the years a lot about the work that you do and the work that we do. But one of the things that, because of my research background and my therapy background, I looked when I began this work about what are the things that make a difference for families. You know, what are therapist behaviors or attitudes, collaborative behaviors, you know, what things make a difference. So much like, and so all of this that I share with you is research based out of social work, child welfare work with families. These are the things that I'm going to share with you that are things that have been proven through research to be effective in creating good outcomes for families. So I really like to talk about these because this is the part, you know, that really helps. So it helps to make a change. And these are active efforts working to support these things. You know, so making sure that we're building rapport that can be done through sharing a genuine and demonstrating a genuine care and concern for the family, active listening and truly acknowledging their circumstances. Not trying to minimize or exaggerate or any of those things, but just really listening and acknowledging where they are, asking questions until you understand. So this is one of the things, you know, especially when you're working with a family from a different culture and or a Native American family, some people get a little bit nervous about what kind of questions should I ask and how should I ask these things? And I don't want to, you know, I don't want to seem incompetent. So I don't want to ask this kind of a question, but the more genuine that you are with them and the more genuine need you to demonstrate to learn about them and their family is going to carry you a lot further with them than maybe being more apprehensive to ask a question out of fear of is this a good question? You know, so you preface it and say, hey, I'm sorry, I don't even know if I'm asking this the right way or asking the right question, but here's what I've got in my mind, and can you help me? And they'll appreciate that much more than either assumptions being made or, you know, or you not having that as full of a picture as you need to have, you know, is definitely not going to help with the family, right? Creating that non-judgmental environment regardless of circumstances. So this is where I talk about, you know, you can talk a little bit about like, what does the setting you're in look like? You know, if you're serving Native families, you know, maybe because of controversy that we've experienced here in the state of North Dakota, whether it be around the Sioux logo or no DAPL or whatever it is, you know, is the space that we're inviting our families into, is it physically appealing to them? Does it show any part of not only of who you are, but also that you respect who they are and maybe not, you know, so stand where you want on any of those issues, but maybe having that stance displayed in your office might not be the best way to establish and maintain rapport with a family who might be sensitive, you know, to that subject, right? Like nobody would put a swastika up in their office. You know what I mean? And so some symbols are very similar to that, to Native people, you know, so maybe taking a look and making sure that the physical environment that you're asking them to be in is really welcoming to who they are.
Could you be more specific, Harmony? I guess I don't understand what might be. The swastika is pretty obvious, but like what things might you suggest that we actually take a look at?
So more specifically, you know, Sioux apparel, You know, if you're living in, doesn't even matter where you live in the state, you know, you might be living over in Dickinson, but you're a graduate of the UND, you know, Fighting Sioux, and you graduated when they were the Fighting Sioux, and you bought a, you know, a big whatever, or you have an image of the logo, you might not want to have that in there because you just don't know where they fall in that space, whether they're going to regard that as disrespectful, or you just kind of maybe not acknowledging an issue that was very real to them, because we don't know, right? You know, so, you know, just saying some of those things that have been divisors for our state and our communities might not be things you want to have hanging up in your office. Does that make sense? Yeah. You know, so that's the best kind of example I have, or you definitely wouldn't, you know, I don't, you know, want to get into too many specifics, but we want to create spaces that are safe. That's our job, right? You know, because we don't ever want a client or anybody to walk into our space and feel unsafe. It was the same thing as a therapist. We were instructed in our training to not have any outward signs of things that might be controversial, because we don't know where that comes from, right? So we want to be thoughtful, especially of politically charged, you know, paraphernalia that might not work well in especially things that speak to social justice, you know, and stuff like that. So yeah. Also making sure clients have adequate input in their case plan. So oftentimes, you know, we often think, and I do this in my personal life with my kids and with maybe even some of my friends, I have an idea of how I think they could or should get better, or could make, you know, should make a change in their life. And I know exactly how they can get from point A to point B the fastest, right? Because I'm all about efficiency. Let's not be inefficient. Let's get this done. Let's get it done fast, and let's get it done right. And that might not be, you know, that might not be where they can start, you know, so making sure that your clients and the families that you work with have an honest and sincere say in their case plan and where they want to start, right? You know, and kind of this unconditional motivational support, you know, so that'd be another word for that, is this unconditional positive regard. But, you know, sometimes it's hard to have all positive regard all the time, and maybe sometimes that's not helpful, but motivational support is essential. You know, I'm going to even if my anger helps motivate you, then let's do that, you know, whatever. But you're always making sure that your families know that you are on their side, right? As far as helping them to create the change that they want to see and that you guys want to see, right? So collaborative behavior. So when you're working with families, right, providing culturally responsive services. And so that's kind of what we talked about, you know, making sure our space is safe and making sure, you know, maybe we're not wearing, anything that might spark some negative feelings in somebody because of the polarity and divisiveness on political issues at the time, which is a lot. We've got a lot of that in our society, you know, in recent years. You know, sharing all case related information. Nobody wants to be blindsided in court with something that they should have known about but didn't, you know, so making sure that, you know, and on both sides, you know, and you can talk to your families about, you know, I need to know everything you know if I'm going to help you, kind of thing. And you need to know what I know. Awareness of services and supports that are available to assist the family. So making sure you know what's out there for all of your families in the community that you live in, you know, like who are the Native American therapists that are in town? What are the Native American services? You know, what's happening in the school and out in the community that could support them, and what are those community supports? So if you know that and you can share that with them, they're gonna feel honored and important, you know, that you made sure that you're sharing, you know, things that are relevant to them specifically, right? Engaging other meaningful adults to assist in the process. So we talked about that when you're talking to family and you're doing that, you know, placement search or whatever, or you're just, you know, dealing with grandma. Let's find as many adults that, whether they're fictive kin or friends or whatever, you know, if they're suitable to help the family, then let's engage them if we can, right? And of course, don't be afraid to provide training in performing tasks, even if it's menial. A lot of our families don't know some of the really basic skills, you know, so being able to train around those. And then also seeking over commitment to tasks and goals. And so one of the things I talk about here is we have, you know, a lot of times when you're writing the goals for your family, make them write them. Make them physically write them. Don't write them for them. You know, so this is a psychological piece, you know, and this applies to even when somebody is taking notes in college. So tell all your kids, and whether you have kids in high school or college, take notes with your hands and write them down yourself, because the process of writing something down means you have to synthesize it, and it means you have to paraphrase it. And so that synthesis helps to create a different level of awareness and understanding and memory, right? So make them write their own goals. Handwrite them. Don't write them for them and hand them to them, because then you just kind of like, that's a representation of you saying, here's your goals. You need to do these, you know. But if they have the sheet in their hand and then can share it back with you, that feels different, right? So that's just one of the things I suggest. So and Amy will share, I think we'll share this with you. If not, it's up on our website. It's a hard card. This is a 2-sided card, but these are all the things we just talked about. And what I tell, you know, what I tell people is especially if you're working with a family that might be a little bit more difficult for you to work with, or you know, whatever, this is just a reminder. And so reviewing this before you work with that hard family, or just at any time, maybe when you're feeling a little bit defeated, these are the things that have been shown through research to have positive impacts on families and cases and case outcomes. So just as a reference to you, it's 1/2 of a hard card that I did. So active efforts. So what does active efforts mean? So there's a lot of questions that we have about active efforts, and how, you know, what is an active effort? How do you define an active effort? And everybody has a different idea of what that might be. And it is true. Active efforts can be anything. And you can make any effort active, is kind of what I say. It can't be anything, right? It can't be a blatant plain referral with a phone number. That's not an active effort. We know that. That's pretty clear, you know. But it means affirmative, which means affirmative, active, thorough, and timely efforts that are intended primarily to maintain or reunite an Indian child with his or her family, right? So the guidelines talk about how these active efforts are intended to prevent unwarranted or unnecessary removals, and to support for quick reunification of families. The focus of active efforts in the law is on the quality of the efforts, and that the efforts are tailored to the family's need, you know. So there can't be, you know, nobody can have a list of here's 10 active efforts, as long as you do these things, you're good. No, each family is going to require, based on the circumstances of their case, different types of active efforts at different times, right? You know, and of course it's up to the courts to determine whether or not active efforts have been met, and if not, you know. And so one of the things that we talk about is active efforts should start at, you know, so I just saw some wording here that I need to change, but active efforts should begin as soon as you begin working with a family that you suspect, that you have reason to know, or you know is Native American. Active efforts during the assessment process should be occurring, because if you get through, you know, you have a non-emergency you know, 960 that you're doing an assessment on, and you get to the end of that assessment and you determine that there's a need to have these children placed into foster care, you're going to have an active efforts finding at the end of 30 days. So making sure that you're doing things to, you know, support maintaining that family during that time, so that you can get, when a QEW comes and looks at the work that's been done with this family, when you're requesting this removal, they can say and testify to, yes, you have done active efforts to help this family stay together, and those have been unsuccessful, thus warranting a need for an out-of-home placement at that time, right? So we're going to want to make sure we're starting those as early as we can, right? So this is more or less just kind of, back up, just kind of elaborating on a few of those things. So affirmative really means identifying goals for the families that are appropriate and directly related to the reason that the children are out of the home, right? They have to, you know, the goals for the family must be relative to the reason that those children are in care, right? You know, and this is where things get a little bit, can go a little bit sideways when people start looking at well-being and trying to expand this thing to a large list of things that may not have super direct bearing on the imminent danger or the impending or present danger that's there, right? So Are you truly being active? So this is the part where, you know, when you talk about the difference between a reasonable effort and an active effort, you should be able to say, I did something. I actually physically did something, or I didn't just offer them a referral. I sat with them and had them save the number into their phone, and I, walked them through what they needed to say in order, how they, because a lot of times, and I don't know about you, but my kids, as they've grown into being adults, just generally, and they're like, Mom, I don't know what to say. I'm trying to call and schedule a medical appointment for myself. And I'm like, well, tell them what, answer their questions, where it seems real, commonplace to us, not so much for them. So being willing to support them through some of those things, those are active. That's you really being active and trying to do your best to help them achieve this goal of getting their family back together and meeting the objectives that you guys have decided together would be the things that would help them to reunify. Right. Are they thorough? So are you following through? Are you checking on them? Do they have the supports that they need to meet their goals? Are you identifying any barriers that they might have? So this might be something like sitting with them and saying, hey, let's put a reminder in your phone, and I'll put one in mine. I'm going to shoot you a text before this and say, you know what I mean? Those types of things, helping them learn how to use their technology, not only to keep in contact with their friends, but, to use it as a calendar, to download their email into their phone so that they have access. Some of those things can all be written down as being examples of active efforts, and you're truly trying to support them in their case plan. Timely, so a lot of times case plans include an evaluation for treatment, substance abuse treatment services, right? But an eval is going to be 2 months down the road, because that's just where people are at, right? So what are we doing in the interim to be active in helping this family remedy their safety issues, right? So there should be work, even if there is some kind of a technical delay in some of the services that they need. Identify things that can be done now and that the family can be working towards, so they don't feel like they're just waiting, right? That they're doing something, and that you're doing something to help them in that time, right? And also making sure that there's valuable efforts. So I always talk about the situation that I encountered at one point, where one of the check boxes, one of the things that the agency wanted the family to do was to get a job. She needed to find employment. And so she did. She got a job at Hardee's, and she had 4 children who were under the age of like 8 or 10. They were all very young children, back to back kind of kids. Getting a job at Hardee's where she has to work weekends and evenings is not an answer, right? And so that's not a valuable active effort for her. Maybe something more valuable would be, hey, let's get you up to the UND Career Counseling Center, and let's do some focus testing and see, I don't know, but making sure that whatever it is that we're having them do is actually has some value that's relevant to their case and to their family, right? And the last bit of that is effective. If what we're doing with families is not working in creating the change that we hope to see, let's get back to the drawing board and figure out what's going to help, right? So being willing and able to work with a family to change directions, or to redefine a start place or a different route. If you can, maybe they don't want to do X, but they'll do Z. And even though Z seems like it's so far away from getting to home where we need to be, if they're willing to do Z, and that will bring them to X. And that's backwards, but maybe I should just switch those. But anyway, that's my point, is just be willing to pivot and do something that might be more effective and timely or valuable. What active efforts should be applied when emergency removal happens? Is there anyone the parents can identify to take their kids? You need to, of course, be, as soon as an emergency removal happens, the tribe definitely needs to be notified. Completing a genogram, helping to get that child into a preferred placement, or doing that right away, making sure that at the outset we're doing some active efforts that are culturally relevant. Parents can't opt out of ICWA, so let's, not, sometimes we get that, parents are like, I don't want ICWA to apply. And that really is based in an understanding, a misunderstanding of what ICWA does for them. and can do for them. But, and also, this is much more in line with safety framework, the continual assessment of the family to provide reunification as soon as imminent danger or impending or present danger is gone, right? And so just a caveat. So working with tribes, you know, so understanding that ICWA is the gold standard. It's been talked about. Some of the work that we're doing here in North Dakota with our ICWA Family Preservation Program, some of you may be familiar with that, you know, really is kind of looking at the tenet of that program is to support the real-time accurate implementation of the Indian Child Welfare Act. So if we are actually doing that and staying, having fidelity to that model, what we're really doing is testing ICWA. And so far in the 2 counties that we have assessed the IFP program, it does show that when ICWA is applied correctly, that there is better outcomes for families. So making sure that we're trying to work with and support the tribe and allowing the tribe to work with and support us in the work that you're doing is really helpful. So making sure that we're communicating and we're, you know, staying in contact with the tribe as much as we can. And like I said, you know, we know that interaction with the tribe is limited, and that's, you know, one of the things that we're trying to do here in North Dakota is increase the tribal capacity to support their off-reservation families, right? So, and that's just basically, let's work together, right? You know, so using teamwork to, you know, and looking at the list on here is just kind of an expanded list of people that you could reach out to support the family, you know, if need be, and if appropriate. So this is some of the active efforts language. I'm just going to kind of cruise past this. This is states, so there's policy, North Dakota policies around active efforts we now have, and I really should update this. Active efforts is now actually in Century Code. And so we have more language and more support around how we do active efforts with families, right? So I talked a little bit about this, the reality versus the ideal. So I was thinking, this is my picture of graduate school, right? I thought I was just going to go straight from my undergrad and I was going to breeze through, and in the 5 years I was going to have my PhD and be done. Not the case, still not the case, right? You know, so really switching in our own minds that this is the reality with our families. How many of you have ever had a family that has gone from A to Z in a straight line? Raise your hand if you're lucky enough to have families who do that for you.
Wouldn't that be so boring? Right?
Huh?
We're gonna be kept on our toes. That would be so boring, right? If we go 1-1. I'm kidding, of course.
Right.
Yeah, no, it doesn't happen, right?
Right. It would be the exception and definitely not the rule if that's the case. You know, maybe some families are super motivated and they are able to move and breeze through it, all the expectations and everything that they need to do. But most of the time our families are all over the place. And so having that personal expectation that that's what this is going to be, you know, might help us to manage our personal feelings about that case and its progress a little bit better. So adjusting our own expectations can be really helpful when we're helping families too, right?
I would like to clarify that those 2 occasions were definitely not the norm. Most of them were all over the place. So I just want to clarify,
Right.
it's happened, but it's just a pleasant surprise.
Yes. So yeah, not that it can't for sure, you know, and don't we wish everybody could go from A to Z in kind of more of a straight line and skip all the rigmarole, but usually not the case. So, and that's why I just said, you know, so some of our personal spaces and places where we live and come from, you know, adjusting our expectations. My grandmother told me years ago, and I'll talk a little bit more about my grandma in a bit, but you know, expectations are a road to resentment is all they are. You know, so when we have expectations of ourselves and or especially of others, you know, that creates a lot of space where we can be disappointed. So I really try to personally in my own personal life, especially in work and in the work I did when I was providing therapeutic services to people who wanted them, you know, making sure I had appropriate expectations was helpful in doing the work that I did. But on your screen here that you're going to see, this is embedded in the regulations piece of the ICWA law. It talks about these being kind of 11 places that helps to provide just some ideas about how and where we should be doing active efforts. So these are some active efforts, but I call them as focus areas. There's some places such as Minnesota and Wisconsin that these are embedded into their law, and they are legally required to do an active effort in each of these areas at a minimum. So we don't have that stringent of a law here in North Dakota, but we're definitely going to want, this is part of the regulation. So a lawyer could fight, but they're really good places to make sure that we're doing some different things. So we're going to go through them kind of one by one and talk a little bit more about them. So example number one is, of course, conducting a comprehensive assessment of the circumstances of the tribe. And so we've talked about this, making sure we have all the information and through that process and asking those questions and including, where the family is and how they feel like they could best start, or, coming up to some consensus of agreement, but making sure that a good assessment is being done of where they are. And this also includes incorporating any cultural aspects of who they might be, whether they're native or, we have an immigration population now in North Dakota that's greater than maybe what we were seeing before, and understanding all of those, different caveats to their cultures is also super important in completing an assessment, right? So what you'll find, and I won't go over, all of the wording at the bottom of the page, but kind of what this was originally was, an explanation and a discussion about the factor, the thing, one of the potential active efforts that you could do, or making sure that you're doing, is also kind of, here's how you would talk about this in an affidavit, kind of thing, and examples, some kind of more specific examples of things that you could talk about or how you could talk about them, but example number two, talks about the identification of appropriate services and barriers, and also embedding in your work that you do with family as an active effort, specific strategies to help them overcome any barriers that they might have that might impede them in doing and engaging in one of the services that you guys have identified that you want to work on in order to help this family. So, and that's what I talked about, like, if forgetting is a thing that they do, and, they might not have access to their email all the time, teach them how to set reminders on their phone. Buy them, I don't know how many of you have Alexa or not, but I swear to God, if I didn't have her, I'm a single parent household. If I did not have Alexa, I don't know that my kids would ever go to bed or brush their teeth or get out to the bus on time. Like, she has so many reminders that she sends me, but let's use technology as tools to help our family, and making sure that they're using them to remind themselves that they have, an appointment today, and or setting up, reminders on your phone to check in with them, about this really important thing. You might not want to do every single thing that they, appointment that they have, but key appointments, that are maybe scheduled out a little bit further. Let's set something maybe in our own schedule that says, hey, shoot a text to so-and-so, or, ask if there's any barriers that's going to prevent them from hitting that appointment tomorrow, especially when you've waited 2 months for an email. You don't want them to miss that, right? So that's an example of an active effort, but making sure we're identifying and helping give them actual resources. And this is to kind of a space where I talked about, somebody who has transportation issues, they've got 3 kiddos and they've got appointments to get to, and you give them a bus pass and it's 50 below. Is that an answer? Is that helping them overcome a barrier? I don't know if you've ever tried to get 3 kids on a bus at 7 o'clock in the morning when it's 50 below and you have to wait there for 10 minutes. It's just not an answer, right? So making sure that we're paying attention to those types of things too, and not creating more barriers in the support services that we're trying to provide to them, right? Of course, number 3 talks about working with the tribe. This is where, we talk about engaging the tribe to the greatest extent that they are capable, making sure that, of course, the tribe has all necessary and relevant information that they're required to have, but, also working with them if they are so inclined and available and able to work with the agency in supporting the family. So that's kind of what, again, that ICWA Family Preservation Program is designed to increase tribal capacity and support in real time, so making sure that we're working well. If we do have IFPs for some of our cases, making sure that we're working well and consistently with our IFPs to support our families. As an example, because in our state, if you do have an IFP, IFPs are a direct representative of the tribe. They are an extension of our ICWA coordinators, and everything they do goes back to and is ran through and supported through consulting with the tribe, the IFPs, consulting with the ICWA coordinators when need be, to help a family be successful. So making sure we're reaching out, getting that ICWA inquiry form out there to begin that process and open the door for the tribe to come to the table and support, and then also allowing that to happen in a good way. Right. So example 4, we've talked kind of quite a bit about this already, making sure that we're doing a diligent search. Ask the tribe for those family trees from enrollment. Lots of tribes can produce that. If their tribe has the capacity to do that, then that's awesome. But also, making sure that every contact we do have that's family, that we're asking about other alternatives for placement and or support services for our families, right? And that's making sure too that we're updating the tribe with any additional. So, maybe right out of the gate, you only have mom and dad's name, but you sent off the ICWA inquiry form, but a week later you figure out who grandma is and who auntie is, and you have some birth dates and those types of things. Please update your ICWA inquiry form and resend so that they have more information, just like you do, to aid in that enrollment process, right? So part of number 5 comes in kind of 2 different pieces and 2 different ways to think about culturally appropriate family preservation. So, one of the ways that you could do active efforts in number 5 is, so say if you live in a border town, and even if you don't, I've heard of some Dickinson cases, driving their kids all the way up to MHA to go to therapy. You know what I mean? It's whatever capacity that you have to engage in those services, but definitely for those workers who live in border towns to reservations, that you're utilizing those services, those more culturally relevant services to support your families, and or, so say if you live, I don't know who all lives here in Bismarck, Mandan area, but we have Tammy Dakota who provides therapeutic services. She's also a foster parent and very involved, so that would be a go-to for culturally relevant services, right? Of course, she has limited capacity and those types of things, but, and this also speaks to kind of knowing who we are, where we are, and what services are culturally relevant and available to our families. In Grand Forks, I know there's a few Native American therapists that are there, as well as in Fargo, so, making sure that we're reaching out to provide the best types of culturally relevant services in that way. So the other way to think about number 5 too, as far as culturally appropriate family preservation or services, is, ascertaining where the family is culturally. And even if, so, we've had this come up too, in situations where, you might have a family who's never smudged before, and so one of the things I ask is that nobody makes an assumption because there is a lack of cultural awareness, knowledge, or services. Don't assume that means that they don't want and couldn't benefit from those, so making sure that we're asking and inquiring is, it might be not something that you do, but is it something you would be interested in doing? Because reaching into those cultural preservation services and smudging and going to sweats or ceremonies or engaging in their culture in some way can be very healing and can really support the family in making some progress, right? So definitely, even if there isn't an indication that that's something they're super into, you wouldn't want to force it on them. You're not going to force anybody to smudge, right? And two, one of the things I like to talk about when we talk about smudging is, how many of you know Teresa Caputo? Anybody? I do. Now, if Teresa Caputo, with her big 5-inch blonde hair, the Long Island medium, for those of you who don't know, she's a psychic or a medium that lives in Long Island. I think she actually moved to like New York now, but she's divorced. Anyway, neither here nor there. She uses smudging, you know, so I've been asked, you know, can I smudge? Or can I help them smudge? Can I touch these things? Of course you can. If Teresa Caputo can do it, anybody can do it. Smudging is not specific. It is something that is definitely revered and honored in our culture, but it's also part of other cultures too, you know. And if you want more information personally about that, please feel free to reach out to myself or to the Native American Training Institute or any Indian friends you might have who might know a little bit about that. You know, and there's other things too, you know, but also being, you know, asking them, you know, do you engage in any cultural activities that we could support you in doing, you know? So maybe they can get home and somebody can do a sweat for them, which can be super, super powerful in creating change, you know. So offering and making that available and part of their plan, if that's something that they want to do, is really important too. So example number 6, of course, steps to keep siblings together. This isn't always possible. So I've heard of situations where we've got, the kids aren't even in the town that mom's in, they're in another town, and then half of them are in another town, you know. So in this situation, when something like this happens, you know, let's make sure that we're making active efforts to keep the siblings connected as much as we can, whether that's through video visitation, and or, you know, meeting in the middle on the weekend so that they can go to the park together, you know, whatever. We need to see that even if children are not able to be placed in the same space, that there are some, that they are being connected and together as much as they can in whatever capacity that they can. So talking a little bit about that. This is another important thing, supporting regular visits. And like I said, this should be happening during the assessment process. I've heard of situations where, you know, kids were taken and mom didn't get to see them till a determination was made at the 30-day hearing, you know what I mean? So making sure that we're providing consistent opportunities for visitation, regular visits, and trying to have those occur in a setting that's in a natural space, right? You know, visiting in dark, dingy basements in a room that has no windows and is behind 3 code locked doors can be a little bit scary and intimidating, you know. So making sure that if visits can take place at McDonald's or in the home, preferably, you know, that we're trying to and making efforts to support visitation happening in a safe place, but also in a place that doesn't feel so scary, right? For our kids and for our moms, right? Our moms and dads, families. And that it's happening. So one of the things that research says is the more opportunities and the more visitation that occurs between a parent and their children, the greater chance you have of reunification, right? So making sure that we're prioritizing visitation and trying to do it in settings that are welcoming and not scary, right? Example number 8, this is kind of basic social work care. Thanks, Lisa and Shannon. Making sure, you know, that our families have access to all the regular social service programs that they might need to support them, you know, in hard times, housing, you know, TANF, EBT, transportation, doing the best we can to support their transportation needs, you know, and attending to all of those other things, you know, and making sure that that's happening in the most culturally relevant ways possible, right? And helping them not only to identify those things, but to utilize and access them. So number 9, it talks about monitoring progress and participation. So this is where we're checking in. It's like, okay, well, today, you know, maybe at the beginning of the week, you give them a call or shoot them a text. I know you got a couple appointments, you know, just checking in and or checking in afterwards. You know, yesterday, I know you had a pretty, you know, or earlier today, you had that appointment. Did you make it? And how did it go? How are you doing? You know, and, you know, making sure that we're supporting and monitoring their progress and participation in services. So, you know, if you get to the 30-day, if you get to the child and family team meeting and at the beginning of the thing, they had to do X, Y, and Z, and then you're not checking in until the child and family team meeting to whether or not those things have happened or are happening, that might not be an active effort. You know what I mean? So trying to support their progress and participation, and using whatever means makes sense to help do that is important, right? Example number 10 talks about what we've already talked about a little bit about, is considering alternative ways to address the family or the child's needs, right? So, you know, what are we, bye Kelsey, what are we doing? Is it working? And let's figure this out. So in one training I asked, you know, do you have any ideas? Does anybody have any ideas here that they might want to share of alternative things that they've done or switched gears, or how they've been, you know, you've maybe done something a little bit creative to help the families. Anybody want to share anything that they've done that might have been a little bit maybe out of the normal work that you've engaged with a family? Hi, Jenny. Well, I won't put anybody on the spot, but one time when I did ask this question, I had somebody say that they created, she's like, I'm not sure if I should be doing this or not, but I'm just gonna tell you, is I created a Facebook page, a fake Facebook page, so that I can video conference with the kids with their mom, you know, or with their sibling, or, you know, just different things like that. Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, so, you know, just making sure, and really what this is talking about is if there's no progress happening, go back to the drawing board and say, okay, we need progress. We need to, you know, work together. Let's rethink this and be willing to switch lanes and adjust plans and goals to support re-engagement and progress in the case, right? So example number 11 talks about post-reunification services and monitoring. You know, so this is about, you know, kids have gone home, and usually there's that trial home placement period and progress, but maybe even after, you know, once the family is home and their involvement has ended, you know, just making sure that they know that you're a support and a resource for them. And if anything is ever happening or comes up that they need help with, you know, I would hope they would reach out to you, you know, and say, and through that process that you're able to say, hey, yeah, let's get you some help, and, you know, provide some suggestions, or however that works. I can't dictate that. Don't know what every situation is there, but, you know, making sure we're checking in. So the families that we have in our IFP program, once they go to reunification and their services with agencies are done, we still have a graduated schedule where we over time reduce the amount of times we check in with them, you know, but, you know, right after it's weekly, then it goes to bi-weekly, then it goes to monthly, and then eventually we decide together when, you know, when the responsibility then becomes on that of the family then to reach out if they ever need to. But, you know, we do some of that checking in. So, you know, if you've got the capacity to do that, just send a text, hey, checking on you, you know, that kind of thing. But, you know, that helps to stabilize their situations and make sure that we don't have reentry into care, right? You know, but so this is the other half of the hard card that I talked about. This is, you know, this is these 11 things. So maybe just looking those over before you meet with families, or, you know, periodically to say, okay, am I doing, you know, especially if you're stuck with a family, am I doing everything I could be doing? And just by reviewing some of these things, whether it's this PowerPoint or just this infographic or hard card, if you print it out. I used to give nice cardstock laminated hard cards out when we did in-person training, but I don't have that anymore. So feel free to use that as a tool just to help support and reminding you, you know, especially when we have some tough cases, looking at things like this can be helpful, right? So this is just one of I use the acronym ACTIVE efforts to develop a goals sheet. Use this or not use this, whatever, it's on the website. I know everybody has their own kind of forms for the counties and how we do goals, but it's just a something, but just, you know, reiterating the point I talked about earlier about making sure they're writing their own goals, make them do it, you know, so we're not doing it for them. So this just gets into kind of a little bit more of the actual regulation and the wording around the regulation. How does the state court ensure that active efforts have been made? This has to happen prior to ordering an involuntary foster care placement or termination of parental rights. They must have concluded that active efforts were done and that they have been made. And if they have not been successful, what did you do? You know, so those are all things that should be outlined in an affidavit. And if you follow the website, there's a lot more guidance around how to detail things, you know, and it talks about date, time, you know, everything of the active efforts that you engaged in, the things that you did and how you supported the family. So the regulations the guidelines aspect of active efforts talks about earliest point possible, CPS, in-home and foster care. Both parents must be considered, of course. Courts must monitor compliance. How long to provide active efforts? I get that question all the way up to TPR. You know, you have to be able to say that till the very last moment you tried to provide active efforts to maintain or to reunify this family. And then also just a reminder, your child only needs to be ICWA eligible. They don't have to actually be enrolled, and that doesn't impact the application of active efforts and or ICWA law, right? So here's a little bit more information about how you document active efforts and how they should be shared, dates, person's contact, other details, evidencing how the state agency provided active efforts, right? Yeah, so just as a little bit of a tool or support for you to have. So another important tool, and raise your hand if you're good at this, but I'm not super funny. But one of the things is humor. So one of the things about, any of you who've maybe worked with Indian people a little bit more is sometimes it can maybe even seem like inappropriate humor, you know, but if you have a family that's going to tease you, you have a family that trusts you and that, you know, is willing to work for it, right? You know, so let's use humor to make a light situation light. And so one of the things that I talk about this is like, Native American parents kind of do some different things with their kids. You know, I've seen memes that talk about, you know, like if a non-native child falls and you know, isn't paying attention and they trip and they skin their knee, a non-native parent might be like, oh, honey, are you okay? And then drop to the ground and try to help them and kiss their boo-boos, where a Native American mom will be like, watch where you're going. You know what I mean? Which might seem insensitive or rude or not comforting and loving, you know, but the world is a different place when you're Native. And as Native parents, I think it's just intrinsic in us, outside of some of the barriers that boarding schools put in place for generations of families and parenting, the impact that had on abilities to parent. You know, we have to impress upon our children the importance of self-responsibility. And that is important from day one all the way through adulthood. It's important for me today, you know, to be responsible, because the world is a different place for Native American people, you know, so making sure they're personally responsible, that's what that is. And that's my way of making sure that, you know, showing my love for my kids is saying, you need to be responsible for what you do. And if you were watching where you were going, you wouldn't trip. And then you can kiss their boo-boos, whatever, you know. But too, you know, you might notice some of those differences in some of the Native parents that you work with. You know, one of the things that was highlighted by the Maine did a massive project of boarding school parents, right? So they went across the entire nation interviewing people who had been in boarding schools or been parented by people who had been in boarding schools. And one of the most common things that they found that almost all of the participants that they talked about was this inability or difficulty in hugging people. And that lives and is alive in my families. My grandmother and great-grandmother both went to boarding schools. Hugging is not something that comes easy to us. You know what I mean? So when maybe you have a parent who isn't displaying a level of physical affection to their child that you feel would be appropriate if they hadn't seen them in 2 weeks, isn't a fair thing to think about, because it's for some families and to varying degrees. And you might come across a mom who's super huggy because maybe their family busted through that and found the way to find hugs comfortable again, right? And so just, and some of those things, that's where having involvement of the tribe or having, some of those cultural resources can be helpful as we make determinations about the behavior of Indian parents and how they interact with their children, right? Might be and look a little bit different, right? And one of the things that I forgot to mention earlier, so I'll talk a little bit about now is just kind of maybe to end in a space where where there's hope, so my grandmother, like I said, my great grandmother, both went to boarding school. My mom did not. Boarding schools still exist to this day. They're not places where state agencies necessarily place children, and most of them are run by Native Americans now, but they still exist. But anyway, my grandmother, when I was born to a teenage mom. Anybody who knows my mother, she was 15 when she had me, and which May 2015, and I was born in the 70s. I'll just say that, but when you're 15 and you're trying to parent in the 70s, it took a village to raise a family. So I bounced between my mother, and two of her sisters actually. And then when I was in the care of my mom at my grandmother's house, that's where she lived, it was my aunts who took care of me a lot of the time, my direct aunts, and then my great aunts. But when I was born, one of the things that happened is my grandmother sobered up. My grandmother is the oldest daughter of 11 children. She had one older brother who was just about a year older than she was. And upon my birth, I was born, also another disclosure, please don't use this to hack me or steal my information, but my birthday is on New Year's Eve. So I was telling, the whole world parties when I turn another year older, right? It's celebrating me. This is what I thought when I was little. I thought the whole world was like celebrating me, but apparently they're not. Anyway, so my birthday was on New Year's Eve. So of course, the night I was born, it was a big party. I was born at 5:36 in the morning. Don't do my star chart, but everybody got really drunk. And then that night ended up with some of my uncles in jail, and it was a mess, right? And it was right shortly after that my grandmother decided she had a new generation coming, and she knew alcohol was a problem, and there was no child welfare involvement at the time because nothing really happened, but she knew that things weren't good. So she sobered up on her own. She went to AA, did a short out of home treatment thing, and engaged in AA, and she sobered up. And shortly after all of that, and through that process, each one of her siblings, the other 10 of them, sobered up also over time. And because of that, today we don't drink at any holiday. We drink at weddings maybe, and that's after 10 o'clock when all the kids go home, those types of things, but I know sometimes, changing, my grandmother making this choice, which is a choice for the families that you serve, that you could be a part of, and changing that trajectory, changed not only things for my grandmother and all of her children, but her 10 siblings as well. You know what I mean? So don't ever feel like helping that one person doesn't have the capacity and the ability to make change. And that's why the quality of the efforts that we provide, the quality of the work that we do with our families is so important, because it can lead to generational change. And I know, had my grandmother not sobered up, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. Chances of that would be very unlikely, but thankfully for me and my children and the generations that will come behind us, all it took was to change her, and everything changed for many generations. So the work you do is so important, and especially with Indian country, in that, having that access to families that tribes don't have access to even, and offering and bringing them back to a space where they can incorporate culture into their lives, is a unique position to be in. So, any support that you need in providing those services, we're growing capacity in our state to support that in a more meaningful and timely way. So really, the work you do is appreciated, It's amazing. And, never ever hesitate to reach out to myself or to the Native American Training Institute or any Indian friends you might have, or the tribe if you can get a hold of them. But like I said, we're working on increasing that capacity. But yeah, I think we're done a little bit even earlier than we normally are, Amy.
Yeah, I do have a question for you, Harmony, and you may
Sure.
have just kind of answered it with your last piece of like who to connect with. But I had a person when you were talking about the hugging piece.
Mhm.
Okay, so the quote unquote typical signs of affection, right? That may be between a parent and child or caregiver and their child that way. The question was, if I don't really have access to an IFP and I'm not necessarily connected with anyone specific at the tribe right now, even though notice has been made, how do I pull in someone to gather that information? Is it I'm going to paraphrase this last part. So this is me putting the words into their mouth. Is it like inappropriate to ask that parent, like, how does your family show affection? Some of those things I know come apart when we're talking about kind of our parent functioning in different pieces like that within our CPS assessment. So some of that may come out through that process, but some of those are kind of deep questions. So sometimes it takes a little bit deeper relationship to maybe get a bigger, deeper response in that area. So wondering in that regard, like, is it appropriate, is kind of what I'm seeing in this message, to ask the family different questions like that? Or is that something I should, try to connect, let's say, with someone at NADI or yourself to kind of, how do we do that?
You surely can, so I always think, as long as you preface, if you're apprehensive about asking a question, start there. Say, hey, I don't know exactly how to answer this or to ask you this, or if this is appropriate. And if it's not, I apologize. That's not my intent. Declaring your intent prior to asking what you feel like might be a loaded question or a risky question, or a question that has the potential to insult them or offend them in some way or hurt them in some way, just to preface it. And honestly, and as you would appreciate, they'll appreciate that authentic and genuine interest and concern to know more about who they are. So I really would encourage you asking them those questions yourself, and it might be that they don't know, and they'll be like, I don't know, and they'll be like, how can I, what, I'm going to reach out to, I got a couple of cards in my pocket. I'm going to reach out to some people and see if we can't, I can't get a better answer for us or a better understanding of this. And it might be something that, because don't ever make the assumption that all Indian people understand why they are where they're at. There are lots of Native people who don't understand historical trauma. They don't understand how families have become and look and are the way they are, why alcoholism rates and diabetes rates are where they're at. Like, there's a lot of Natives who don't know those things. So you might actually have a little bit more information about why they're where they're at, some of the things that might contribute to why they're where they're at, more so than even they do, because it's one of the things we talk about now, the history of the United States and its impact on families isn't something that's shared in a general curriculum in school. They don't talk about all of those things.
Well, and if I may, Harmony, we should be using that approach with every family, because we can't assume that even if I grew up right next door to the same family, all these years, that I know how their family interacts, or I know everything about their family or the trauma they might have, or they might completely do different ways of showing their affection with their children than I did, or do you know what I mean? So I think this golden approach that we talk about, that you've talked about, really we should be doing that with everybody.
Yes, for sure. I worked in Red Lake for about a year. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Red Lake area, but it's a Chippewa tribe, which is similar to mine. It was kind of neat because they have similar names like we do in our tribe, maybe spelled like one letter off or whatever, but they look a lot like us too. So it was kind of a weird experience for me, a neat experience for me. When I worked there, but I worked with the lady who worked in the behavioral health department with us, who was in charge of doing all of the intakes. She was from Jamaica. So she was an African-American lady from Jamaica who was Jamaican, and she had the cool little accent. So it was kind of cool. She had great stories and brought amazing food to us who worked there. But outside of that, she came to me in tears one day and sat in my office and she said, I just don't get it. She said, I have these Native moms, dads, families, kids, people come in and they tell me stories that make me want to crawl in a hole and die. And they tell it to me with such a stoic and straight face, and nobody cries and nobody bats an eye. And it's just like they're talking about what they had for supper yesterday. She said, and I don't get it. Don't understand how that can be a thing. Well, she said, where I'm hearing what they're saying and I want to crawl in a hole myself. You know, she said, I don't get it. You know, but trauma in Indian country is chronic. You know, so it's not always like if we identified every caveat, everything that happened as being traumatic and had a, what people might consider a traditional traumatic response, we would be paralyzed. And that can't be, you know, so Indian people have found ways to compartmentalize and manage trauma, chronic trauma, in a very different way. And it might seem just unnatural to you, you know, but there's so much more, and such a long history of trauma that they're not going to look like everybody else. They're not going to have that that regular trauma response, right? That you might think that you hear about in books, you know, those types of things. So yeah. But yeah, but good luck. No.
Okay, I have another question for you that came in the chat. It's kind of along those same lines of like, how do you have that conversation? And again, you may have already answered this, but I just don't know if there's anything else you want to add to it. It's about asking about kind of Native traditions they hold, different pieces of culture that they've incorporated with their children or that they wanted to incorporate with their children. It is coming from a foster family. So any advice that way that you want to share?
Yeah, it's just, you know, and if you start gently with any conversation and you just say, you know what, I don't like to make assumptions about where anybody, any family is culturally or, you know, traditionally or tribally, whatever it is, you know, and like Rachel said, you know, this can be asked of anybody in a gentle way. I don't ever want to make an assumption, you know, but some of the families that I've worked with, you know, you want me to smudge their kids or want me to engage in these more cultural practices. Where do you fall? And listen to them. And if they say, well, I don't do none of that stuff. And then it would be okay for you to say, you know, if that's something you're interested in, I've got some resources or access to some people who might be able to support you if that's something you want to learn and incorporate into, you know, because I, you know, and share personal experience. Most of the families that I'm also part of the cultural, I'm a cultural liaison to some foster families here in Bismarck. So I've gone to some of their homes, foster homes in the area, and done smudging for them, taught them about smudging, and done some of that stuff to support that happening, you know, for the foster kids anyway, and I would also definitely be, you know, as a cultural liaison, be willing to do some of that in person. And that program too is something that's growing in the state. So, you know, if you guys have any access to some people who you might have reached out like, hey, you want to be a foster parent, and they're like, ooh, I can't, but they're Native and they live in that community, there is another program that NADI supports through the state, and they work with the state to do this, is this cultural care liaison program that would provide would be a community member, somebody who lives in the community that can support a non-ICWA preferred or non-Native foster homes in attending to the cultural pieces of the kids they have in their homes. You know, so, you know, anybody, refer them to NADI because we want to grow that capacity in the state, because we know that, you know, you guys get super frustrated when you want to meet a preferred placement, but there's no homes to do that. And that's frustrating, right? Makes your job harder to do. So, you know, one of the things the grant has tried to cover is from A to Z, and with lots of different programs. But yeah, I think there's even a stipend, and Chris is still on. I think she's the one. I think there's a,
Yes.
Carissa Cox, I believe I just got somebody sent me an email saying, hey, they've approved a stipend for culture care liaisons who engage families and work with families, like it's like $50 a month or something for the work they do. So it doesn't come without some type of payment if they do that. So that's nice. It might encourage people to, you know, I don't do it because I've been doing it for years and I've never gotten a dime, and that's not important to me, but to some people it might be. And we should pay people for their support and help, because everybody else gets paid to do it too. So yeah, anyway.
Harmony, if you don't mind, I was just going to mention with that too, I had met with Jesse and Andrew yesterday, and if there are any Native currently licensed foster parents who would want to step into that ICWA cultural liaison role, that would be an option as well. So.
Yes, so growing capacity to better support, you know, families of all types. So yeah, I guess it's like time. So, but any questions, you guys always feel free to reach out to me. I'll be in this role for a bit longer, and when I'm not, CFSTC and the state will know, reach out to the Native American Training Institute for resources, but you know, definitely get out there and do ask questions and reach out if you need help or support, for sure. Otherwise, I'll be quiet now. I have a tendency.
Yeah, I think we're good. We can definitely connect you with Harmony. There's a ton of resources on our website that actually Harmony and then her implementation team kind of put together. So we'll send a follow-up email with some resources from Harmony. And those of you who kept your cameras on and we're looking for those social work CEUs, we'll get those certificates out to you. My guess is about within the week. So if you have any other follow-up questions or things like that, you can stay on. If not, you're free to have the rest of your Thursday back. And maybe it doesn't feel like September out there, but have a good fall around the corner if we don't see you.
Yes, thanks for calling back so quickly. Do you have a few minutes to visit?
Yes, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.